So picture this. You're Captain Jake Miller, and you've been running salvage operations out in the Outer Rim for about 15 years now. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. And honestly, Jake likes the peace and quiet out there. His ship, the Lucky Break, isn't much to look at from the outside, but she's reliable, and that's what matters when you're 3 weeks away from a nearest space station. Jake's crew is what you'd call a mixed bag. There's Vex, his Zen-3 engineer. Think of a 7-foot-tall lizard person with 4 arms and the patience of a saint. Vex has been with Jake since the beginning, and the guy can fix anything with spare parts and determination. Then there's Lisa Thompson, his human navigator, fresh out of the academy and eager to prove herself. She's got this habit of humming old Earth songs while she works the star charts. The rest of the crew rounds out with an Altarian pilot named Cree and 2 more humans, Danny and Mike, who handle the heavy lifting and cutting equipment. They're all good people, just trying to make an honest living in the vast emptiness of space. Most days, they find old mining equipment, maybe some abandoned cargo containers, nothing too exciting. Jake preferred it that way. He'd seen enough excitement during his time in the Merchant Marines to last 3 lifetimes. But this morning was different. Lisa picked up the distress beacon signatures about 4 hours ago. Multiple signals, all broadcasting the same emergency code. When they dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates, what they found made Jake's stomach drop to his boots. The wreckage field stretched for kilometers in every direction. Pieces of hull plating drifted silently through space, some still glowing cherry red from plasma burns. Cargo containers tumbled end over end, their contents spilled like cosmic confetti. But it was a pattern of destruction that made Jake's blood run cold. This wasn't some random pirate attack or mechanical failure. This was systematic, professional, deliberate. Every single escape pod had been targeted. Jake could see the scorch marks where plasma cannons had tracked each one down individually. The lifeboats, those last resort emergency vessels that were supposed to be protected under every galactic treaty, had been vaporized completely. Nothing remained but twisted metal and fading energy signatures. Danny came over the comm, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Captain, I'm counting at least 8 different ship signatures in this debris. Looks like the whole New Geneva convoy got hit." Jake felt his hands clench involuntarily. The New Geneva convoy was a regular passenger run. Families moving to the outer colonies, scientists heading to research stations, kids going to visit grandparents. These weren't military vessels or corporate targets. These were civilian transports carrying regular people who just wanted to get from point A to point B safely. That's when Vex called in from the far side of the debris field. Now, Zen-3 are known throughout the galaxy for being calm under pressure. Their physiology doesn't really allow for panic. Their nervous systems are just wired differently. But when Vex's voice came through the comm system, it was shaking. "Captain Miller," Vex said, and Jake could hear something in his engineer's voice he'd never heard before, not in 15 years of working together. "You need to see this." Jake suited up and took one of the EVA pods out to Vex's position. What he found there would stick with him for the rest of his life. Floating in the dark vacuum of space, caught in the twisted remains of what used to be a passenger cabin, was a small stuffed animal. A teddy bear, the kind every human kid seems to have. Half of its fuzzy brown fur had been melted away by plasma fire, and one of its button eyes was missing. But it was still recognizable. Still unmistakably a child's toy. Jake reached out with his suit's mechanical arm and carefully retrieved the bear. As he held it, the full weight of what had happened here crashed down on him. The Keth Collective, those militant aliens who thought human expansion was some kind of contamination that needed to be wiped out, hadn't just attacked a convoy. They had deliberately targeted families. They had hunted down escape pods filled with terrified parents trying to save their children. They had killed kids. On purpose. The toy bear seemed impossibly small in his armored gloves. Somewhere in this debris field, a child had clutched his bear during the final, terrifying moments of their short life. Maybe they were hoping their parents could protect them. Maybe they thought the bad guys would see they were just kids and let them go. They were wrong. As Jake floated there in the silence of space, holding the half-melted teddy bear, something fundamental shifted inside him. The Keth Collective had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. They had hurt human children, and they had no idea what was coming for them. Dr. Tom Wilson has always been the kind of guy who finds excitement in the small things, like when he discovers a new protein structure in alien moss, or when his computer models finally crack the genetic code of some strange plant from a distant world. His research station on Proxima. 7 isn't much, just a small outpost with a lab, living quarters, and enough supplies to last 6 months between supply runs. But it's home, and more importantly, it's peaceful. The lab itself is pretty typical for a xenobiology research facility. Microscopes, gene sequencers, sample containers filled with specimens from dozens of different worlds. The walls are lined with charts showing DNA structures and protein chains that would make most people's eyes glaze over. But Tom loves this stuff. He's been studying alien plant life for 12 years now, ever since he finished his doctorate back on Earth. What makes the lab special, though, is the small play area in the corner. There's a little desk where 8-year-old Beth does her homework, transmitted daily from the correspondence school back on New Terra. There are bins full of building blocks, art supplies, and a collection of interesting rocks and crystals that she's found around the station. Beth loves geology almost as much as her dad loves biology, and she's always bringing him samples to examine under the microscope. This particular morning started like any other. Tom was reviewing genetic samples from the latest supply drop, some fascinating fungal specimens from the caves of Kepler 442b. Beth was in her corner, building an elaborate tower out of magnetic blocks, while humming that catchy tune she learned from her online music class. Something about spaceships and adventure, the kind of song that gets stuck in your head for days. "Daddy, look how tall I made it," Beth called out, and Tom glanced over to see her tower, now reaching almost to her shoulder. She had this huge grin on her face, the kind that only 8-year-olds can manage when they're genuinely proud of something they've accomplished. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Tom said, and he meant it. Beth had figured out some kind of structural engineering principle all on her own, using the magnetic properties of the blocks to create a stable base that could support the height. Your mom is going to love seeing pictures of that when she gets back. Beth's mom, Dr. Jennifer Wilson, was returning from a medical conference on Centauri Prime. She'd been gone for 3 weeks, presenting her research on treating radiation sickness in space travelers. The transport ship was supposed to arrive at New Geneva Station in 2 days, and then she'd catch the weekly supply run back to Proxima 7. Beth had been counting down the days on her little calendar, marking each one off with a bright red crayon. That's when the quantum burst transmission came in. Tom almost didn't answer at first. Official communications usually came to the regular communication schedule, not via emergency quantum burst. But the transmission codes were from the Colonial Health Service, Jennifer's organization. With a growing sense of unease, Tom activated the message. The words hit him like a physical blow. Transport vessel medical dawn destroyed. All passengers and crew lost. No survivors. Tom stared at the screen, reading the message over and over, as if the words might somehow change. Jennifer had been on the medical dawn. She was supposed to come home. She was supposed to see Beth's block tower and help with bedtime stories, and complain about Tom leaving his coffee cups all over the lab counter. "Daddy?" Beth's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What's wrong?" Tom turned slowly, and the look on his face must have scared her, because Beth's smile faded immediately. How do you tell an 8-year-old that her mother is never coming home? How do you explain that the person who kissed her goodnight every evening over video call, who helped with math homework from 3 star systems away, who sent her funny pictures and silly messages every day, how do you explain that all of that is just gone? Tom knelt down beside Beth's block tower, trying to find words that wouldn't completely shatter her world. "Beth, honey, there was an accident with Mommy's ship." The conversation that followed was the hardest thing Tom had ever done. Beth cried, of course. She asked if Mommy was hurt, if the doctors could fix her, if they could go help, and when Tom gently explained that Mommy wasn't hurt anymore, that she wasn't anything anymore, Beth looked up at him with those big brown eyes, Jennifer's eyes, and asked a question that changed everything. "Daddy, why would anyone hurt kids?" That's when Tom realized Beth didn't understand. She thought it was an accident, some kind of mechanical failure or space storm. She didn't know that the intelligence reports were already coming in, describing how the Keth Collective had systematically hunted down passenger transports, how they had specifically targeted civilian vessels because they carried families, how they had sent a message across all human space claiming that human contamination needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. They had killed Jennifer not because she was a threat, but because she was human, because she had a family, because her existence and Beth's existence somehow offended their twisted ideology. Tom Wilson had spent his entire adult life studying life, how it grows, how it adapts, how it thrives in the most impossible conditions. He was a scientist, a researcher, a man who believed in knowledge and understanding and peaceful coexistence. But as he held his crying daughter, something fundamental broke inside him. The Keth Collective had declared war not just on humanity, but on the very idea of human families. They had made it personal, and they had no idea what they had just awakened. Here's where things get really interesting, and honestly, a little scary if you're not human. Within 72 hours of the news breaking about the new Geneva convoy massacre, something completely unprecedented starts happening across human space. And when I say unprecedented, I mean nothing like this has ever been recorded in galactic history. There's no emergency session of the Human Colonial Council, no presidential address calling for war, no military draft, notices going out to reservists. Instead, what happens is something that makes alien observers genuinely nervous. Humans just start moving on their own, like some kind of invisible signal went out that only they could hear. It starts small. On New Terra, retired Marine Sergeant Bob Martinez gets the news while he's feeding chickens on his little farm outside New Sacramento. Bob did 3 tours during the Frontier Wars 20 years ago, then came home and swore he'd never touch a weapon again. He's been growing tomatoes and raising livestock ever since, living the quiet life he always dreamed about. But when he sees the footage of that stuffed bear floating in space, Bob walks into his barn and opens a storage locker he hasn't touched in 2 decades. His old combat gear is still there, wrapped in protective plastic. 6 hours later, Bob's on a transport heading for the nearest military depot, carrying a duffel bag and a look in his eyes that his neighbors have never seen before. Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Chong is running freight between the Proxima system and the outer colonies when she gets word about the convoy. Lisa's hauling agricultural equipment. Boring stuff, but it pays well and keeps her small company afloat. She's got contracts, schedules, customers depending on her deliveries. But after reading the casualty reports, Lisa makes a decision that would have seemed insane just days earlier. She reroutes her entire cargo manifest. No charge, no contracts. She starts hauling supplies to gathering points that seem to be organizing themselves across human space. When her Altarian co-pilot, Jex, asks what she's doing, Lisa just says, "They killed our kids, Jex. Our children." The way she says it makes Jex's feathers flatten against his skull. He's worked with humans for 8 years, but he's never heard that tone in a human voice before. The transformation is happening everywhere. Dr. Amy Rodriguez abandons her decade-long research project on stellar formation at the Cambridge Observatory. She's been working toward a Nobel Prize in astrophysics. But suddenly none of that matters. Instead, she's using her access to deep space monitoring equipment to track Keth ship movements, compiling targeting data with the precision that only a lifetime of scientific training can provide. Professor Mike Chen leaves his comfortable teaching position at the University of Mars and shows up at a logistics center in New Shanghai, carrying hard drives full of industrial engineering blueprints. When asked what he plans to do with them, Mike just smiles coldly and says, "Make things, useful things." But the most remarkable case is Dr. Tom Wilson. 3 days after losing his wife, Tom leaves his daughter Beth with her grandparents on Earth and boards a transport ship heading for the frontier. He's carrying with him something that makes military intelligence officers' eyes widen: complete biological surveys of every known Keth world. Atmospheric compositions, soil analyses, bacterial ecosystems, plant genetics, data that would have taken government researchers months to compile, and Tom had it all sitting in his personal research files. The transport Tom's on has a mixed crew, 2 humans and 3 Zenthri who've been running cargo for 15 years. The Zenthri captain, Vec, has always gotten along well with his human crew members. They're good people, he thinks. A little emotional sometimes, but reliable and hardworking. But over the course of the journey, Vec watches something change in the humans that makes his scales prickle with unease. They don't talk about revenge or violence. They don't rant about payback or getting even. Instead, they work with a quiet, methodical focus that's somehow more disturbing than rage would have been. Tom sits in the cargo bay for hours, cross-referencing biological data with tactical information that other passengers are sharing. A retired logistics officer named Dave is calculating supply line vulnerabilities. A former communications specialist named Janet is working on signal intercept protocols. They're not angry, they're problem-solving. They're treating the complete dismantling of the Keth Collective like a complex engineering project. When Vec mentions this to his Zen-3 crew members, they exchange worried looks. One of them, an old-timer named Kex who's worked with dozens of species over the years, puts it best. I've seen angry species before. I've seen vengeful ones. But I've never seen anything like this. They're not planning to fight the Keth. They're planning to systematically disassemble their entire civilization. And they're going about it like they're building a starship engine, with blueprints and calculations and quality control checks. The most chilling part is how organized it all is without any organization. No one's giving orders, but somehow everyone knows exactly what to do. It's like watching a massive machine come together, except each piece is a human being who's decided that harming children is a line that cannot be crossed. The sleeping giant is awake, and it has a PhD in 17 different fields. The Keth Collective's military command thought they had humanity figured out. After studying human conflict for decades, their strategists felt confident about what was coming. Admiral Kethvar, their supreme military commander, had prepared his forces for the typical human response. Massive battle fleets emerging from hyperspace, orbital bombardments turning their worlds to glass, ground invasions with heavy armor and overwhelming firepower. That's how humans had always fought their wars, right? Brutal, direct, and devastating. Their defense networks were ready. Planetary shields powered up to maximum. Fighter squadrons on high alert. Every major military installation had been reinforced and supplied for a long siege. Admiral Kethvar even issued a statement through official channels, claiming that humanity's primitive emotional responses would lead to their own destruction when they crashed against Keth defensive positions. But weeks passed and no battle fleets appeared. No invasion forces. No dramatic declarations of war. Instead, something far more terrifying began to unfold. It started with their supply chains. The Keth military machine relied on a complex network of factories, mining operations, and transport routes spanning dozens of worlds. These systems have been running smoothly for centuries, protected by the best security money could buy. But suddenly, things began going wrong in ways that made no sense. On Keth Prime, their main weapons manufacturing facility began experiencing equipment failures. Not explosions or obvious sabotage, just mechanical breakdowns. Metal components that had worked perfectly for years suddenly started corroding from the inside out. At first, the engineers thought it was a quality control issue, maybe a bad batch of materials or contaminated shipment. But when they examined the affected parts under microscopes, they found something impossible. The metal wasn't just corroding, it was being eaten by bacteria. Engineer bacteria that consume specific alloys used in weapon construction while leaving everything else completely untouched. Dr. Amy Peterson, a human microbiologist who had somehow gained access to their facility disguised as a maintenance worker, had introduced organisms so precisely designed that they could distinguish between a gun barrel and a door handle at the molecular level. The food situation was even more disturbing. Across 17 different Keth agricultural worlds, crops began failing overnight, but it wasn't drought or disease. The plants were simply becoming inedible. Soil samples revealed modified microorganisms that altered the chemical composition of anything grown in that dirt, making it toxic to Keth physiology while leaving the underlying ecosystem completely healthy. Human botanist Dr. Frank Miller had spent 3 months posing as a trade representative, collecting soil samples and mapping agricultural systems with the patience of someone who'd spent his entire career studying plant genetics. The most unsettling part wasn't the sabotage itself. It was how it was being carried out. These weren't soldiers or spies in any traditional sense. They were regular people. Teachers, scientists, engineers, doctors. People who had never fired a shot in anger, who probably couldn't field strip a rifle if their lives depended on it. But they understood systems. They understood how things worked, how to make them stop working, and how to do it without leaving fingerprints. Janet Williams, a communication specialist from New Boston, had infiltrated their military communication networks by simply applying for a job as a civilian contractor. Over 6 months, she quietly installed backdoors in their encrypted channels while maintaining their systems better than their own technicians ever had. When the time came, she could listen to every military communication in real time and jam their frequencies with the flip of a switch. But what really terrified the Keth leadership was what the humans weren't doing. Every time a military facility was sabotaged, civilian populations in the area were somehow evacuated first. Anonymous tips would lead Keth civilians to safety before their weapons factories mysteriously stopped working. Medical supplies appeared in refugee camps faster than the Keth government could distribute them. Human agents were protecting Keth children, even while systematically dismantling their parents' war machine. It was during the evacuation of the industrial city of Keth Taylor that the full scope of human planning became clear. As families fled the city before their munitions plants suffered mechanical failures, they found prepositioned supply caches containing food, medicine, and temporary shelters. The supplies were labeled in perfect Keth script. For the children, from Earth. Admiral Kethvar realized with growing horror that humanity wasn't just defeating them. They were demonstrating something far more terrifying. They were showing the galaxy the difference between winning a war and teaching a lesson. Every action was calculated not just to disable Keth military capability, but to prove that humans could protect life even while ending threats. The message being sent to every watching species was crystal clear. Hurt our children, and we will dismantle your civilization piece by piece. But we'll do it while keeping your children safe, because that's what separates us from you. We'll show you that justice doesn't require becoming monsters ourselves. And somehow, that restraint was more frightening than any battle fleet could have been. The end came not with the roar of battleships or the flash of orbital bombardments, but with something far more powerful: words. Simple, measured words broadcast across every communication channel in Keth space at exactly 1,400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Dr. Tom Wilson stood in what had become the unofficial headquarters of the Recompense Coalition, a converted conference room aboard the neutral space station Harmony Point. Around him sat representatives from 47 different species, all watching with a mixture of fascination and barely concealed nervousness. The Altarian ambassador kept shifting his feathers. The Zenthri delegation had gone completely silent, their scales darkened to deep purple, a sign of profound unease in their species. Tom looked different now than he had 6 months ago in his quiet research lab on Proxima 7. The gentle scientist who used to help his daughter Beth with her building blocks had been replaced by someone harder, more focused. His eyes held a weight that hadn't been there before. The weight of speaking for 100 billion humans who had just demonstrated something that would change galactic politics forever. The transmission equipment hummed quietly as technicians made final adjustments. In a few minutes, Tom's words would reach every Keth world simultaneously, carried by quantum burst communicators that would punch through any jamming attempts. The Keth leadership would hear this message whether they wanted to or not. Broadcasting in 30 seconds, the human technician announced. Around the room, alien diplomats leaned forward in their seats. Some of them had been taking notes throughout this entire campaign, trying to understand what they'd witnessed. Others simply stared, still processing how a species they considered emotionally unstable had just systematically dismantled one of the galaxy's most militaristic civilizations without firing a single shot in anger. Tom took a deep breath and stepped up to the microphone. Behind him, a simple display showed the emblem of the Recompense Coalition, a child's hand reaching toward the stars, surrounded by the flags of every human world. It wasn't threatening or military. It was just hopeful And somehow, that made it more powerful than any battle flag could have been. This is Dr. Tom Wilson. Speaking on behalf of the Recompense Coalition and the people of humanity, he began, his voice calm and steady. 6 months ago, the Keth Collective made a choice. They chose to target civilian vessels carrying families. They chose to hunt down children. They chose to declare that human families had no right to exist in this galaxy. Across Keth space, military commanders and political leaders gathered around communication screens, watching this mild-mannered scientist who had somehow brought their civilization to its knees. Admiral Kethvar, who had once boasted about humanity's primitive emotional responses, now sat in a command bunker, surrounded by reports of infrastructure failures that had crippled every major military installation under his command. Today, we offer you terms, Tom continued, not because we have to, but because we choose to. Because unlike some species in this galaxy, we believe in justice over vengeance. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. The Keth military leadership would stand trial before a galactic tribunal for crimes against civilian populations. Their military capabilities would be permanently reduced to defensive levels only. No more ships capable of projecting force beyond their own borders. Most importantly, reparations would fund the creation of a galactic child protection initiative, ensuring that no species would ever again face what the passengers of the new Geneva convoy had endured. These terms are not a request, Tom said, and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of steel that had driven humanity's response. They are a statement of what will happen. Your military infrastructure has been neutralized. Your weapon production has ceased. Your communication networks exist only because we allow them to. You have no functional economy, no operational government, and no ability to resist. But then his voice softened again, and he delivered the words that would be quoted in galactic history texts for centuries to come. However, your civilians are safe. Your children are protected. Medical supplies are flowing to your worlds faster than your own government ever provided them. Your agricultural systems will be restored once leadership changes hands. We have demonstrated that we can dismantle your civilization while keeping your people alive, because that is what separates justice from revenge. The silence that followed was deafening. On 17 different Keth worlds, political leaders stared at their screens, finally understanding what they faced. This wasn't conquest in any traditional sense. This was something far more terrifying. It was education. Humanity was teaching the galaxy a lesson about what happened when you cross certain lines. Within 6 hours, the Keth Collective surrendered unconditionally, but the real impact went far beyond one species' defeat. As news of surrender spread, something profound settled over the galactic community. Species that had viewed humanity as useful but unpredictable began revising their assessments. The humans didn't just love their own children. They loved the very concept of childhood itself. And they possessed both the capability and the unwavering will to ensure no one would ever again mistake that love for weakness. The galaxy had learned a new rule. You can mess with humanity's trade routes, their colonies, even their governments. But you touch their kids? You touch any kids? Then you deal with something that makes traditional warfare look like a polite disagreement. And that changed everything.